The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with New York's financial elite, but Sarah Chen saw only the imperfections. A champagne tray tilting too far left, a flickering LED in the corporate logo display. Marcus Reynolds's collar, damp with sweat despite the carefully controlled temperature. She moved through the crowd like a ghost in Channel, a last-minute purchase she'd justified as maintaining corporate image. Her tablet discreetly tracked 2 sets of countdowns. 47 minutes until the product launch announcement, and 16 minutes until Marcus's next dose of medication, which she'd noticed wasn't in his pocket where it should be. Marcus, darling. Victoria Hammond, their biggest potential investor, air-kissed him from 3 inches away. The rumors about this new tech platform of yours have my board salivating. Sarah watched Marcus's left hand tighten around his champagne flute. The slight tremor wouldn't be noticeable to anyone else, but she'd been cataloging his symptoms for weeks. As he launched into his practice pitch, she positioned herself exactly 4 meters away, close enough to intervene, far enough to maintain the illusion of his independence. The integration of AI with renewable energy will revolutionize. Marcus paused, clearing his throat. Sarah smoothly stepped forward, offering a water glass that appeared as if from thin air. He took it without looking at her, but she noticed his knuckles whiten around the stem. Through her earpiece, the event coordinator announced a minor crisis with the presentation equipment. Sarah dispatched 2 easy specialists before the coordinator finished speaking. Her gaze never left Marcus, who was now subtly leaning against a pillar while nodding at a venture capitalist's joke. The live feed from their Tokyo office confirmed the global market's eager anticipation. Reynolds Technologies stock had climbed 3% just on the rumor of tonight's announcement. Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from 5 different department heads, all requiring immediate attention. She handled each crisis without breaking stride, her mind calculating contingencies. When Marcus removed his suit jacket, Sarah knew. The move was too casual for him, too unplanned. She watched him hand it to a passing server with a familiarity he never showed the staff. His shirt, she noticed, had dark patches spreading across the back. 5 minutes to the announcement, Mr. Reynolds, she murmured as she passed, close enough to catch his slight sway. The teleprompter is ready, and I've had them adjust the stage lighting, less harsh than during rehearsal. He gave a terse nod, but his eyes seemed unfocused. The hand that wasn't holding his water glass kept brushing his left arm, an unconscious tell she'd observed developing over the past week. As Marcus made his way toward the stage, Sarah opened her phone to the pre-typed emergency contact list she prepared 3 weeks ago. Her other hand gripped the keycard to his private office upstairs, the one she wasn't supposed to have access to, but had quietly authorized after finding the first prescription. She didn't know she'd be using both within the hour, but something in her gut told her the perfect storm was about to break. The only question was whether she could keep everyone else from noticing when it did. The private hospital room looked nothing like its usual sterile self. Sarah had quietly arranged for the bland artwork to be replaced with photographs of Reynolds Technologies' global offices, subtle reminders of what Marcus was fighting to return to. His favorite ergonomic chair had been delivered for visitors, though he didn't know she'd been the one sleeping in it for the first 48 hours after his surgery. The board approved the interim leadership structure, Sarah reported, setting up her laptop on the adjustable table. She pretended not to notice how Marcus's hand shook slightly as he reached for the water glass. Thompson will handle public appearances. Chen has Asia operations, and I'll continue coordinating between departments. And who? Marcus asked, his voice rougher, but carrying a new note of curiosity, decided on that particular arrangement. You did, sir. She pulled up an email from 3 months ago. In the contingency plan you approved, though you may not have read page 47 in detail. A strange sound filled the room. It took Sarah a moment to realize Marcus Reynolds was laughing. Actually laughing, not the calculated chuckle he used in board meetings. Page 47, he repeated. Where I never read the fine print. How long have you been preparing for this, Sarah? The use of her correct name still startled her. Since I found the first prescription, she admitted. Though your coffee switching to decaf might have been a bit premature. That was you? He shook his head. I thought the barista was incompetent. I nearly had them fired. The barista has 3 kids in college. I thought a slight coffee adjustment was preferable to unemployment. She pulled up the next document. Now, about the Anderson merger. Tell me about your father first. Sarah's fingers froze over the keyboard. Sir? In the office, you mentioned your father had survived something similar. I'd like to hear about it. His voice carried none of its usual commanding tone. Instead, there was something almost gentle in his inquiry. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah sat down in the visitor's chair without her tablet or phone in hand. He was lucky, she began. Someone at his office knew CPR. After that, I made sure to get certified, stay updated, just in case. Just in case? Marcus echoed. Like installing an AED in my private office? Company policy requires one within 50 feet of any space where employees regularly work. She straightened reflexively. Your office didn't comply. Sarah. His use of her name still felt new. I think we both know that's not the real reason. A nurse appeared with medication, and Sarah rose smoothly. The markets open in Tokyo in an hour. I should prepare the briefing. Stay, Marcus said. Not an order, but a request. The markets have survived without me for a week. Tell me what else I've missed on page 47. The prescription paper crackled between Sarah's fingers as she smoothed it out under her desk lamp. Metoprolol. Her mother's voice echoed in her head from years of dinner-table conversations about the cardiac unit, beta blockers, heart problems, serious medication. The paper had been crumpled and shoved deep into Marcus's private shredder bin, the one she wasn't supposed to touch but emptied weekly anyway. Sarah glanced through the glass walls at her boss, who was currently pacing during a conference call. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, and she noticed for the first time how his custom-tailored shirts had begun to hang slightly loose around his shoulders. Marcus Reynolds, the man whose personal brand was built on ruthless perfection, was quietly coming undone. Over the next 2 weeks, she cataloged the signs with growing concern. The half-empty water bottles on his desk, when he used to drink straight black coffee. The way he paused at the top of stairs, pretending to check his phone. 3 cancelled squash games with board members. He'd never cancelled exercise before. She started tracking his patterns in a password-protected document titled Key for Supply Chain Analysis. Sharon. His voice cut through her thoughts one Tuesday morning. She didn't bother correcting him anymore. The Thompson presentation isn't printing properly. Sarah entered his office to find him standing over the printer, his left hand massaging his chest, in what he probably thought was a subtle gesture. The other hand gripped the desk edge, his knuckles white with tension. Let me take care of that, Mr. Reynolds, she said, smoothly stepping between him and the printer. As she cleared the paper jam, she watched his reflection in the window. His face had a grayish tinge that makeup couldn't quite hide. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, he snapped, but the usual steel in his voice had dulled to aluminum. I've already sent the updated slides to the conference room, Sarah replied, and I took the liberty of having maintenance adjust the thermostat. The room was running warm this morning. She didn't mention that she'd also positioned his chair closer to the door, reducing how far he'd need to walk. That afternoon, she found another addition to his trash, a doctor's business card with a hastily scrawled note about scheduling an overdue appointment. The card joined her growing collection of evidence, tucked away in a folder labeled Facility Maintenance Records, 2024. During the evening executive call, Marcus's voice faltered mid-sentence. Sarah smoothly jumped in with statistics he hadn't yet memorized, making it seem like a planned handoff. Through the glass, she saw him press his palm against his chest again. Later, as she updated her hidden tracking document, Sarah added a new note. Called Dr. Rivera's office. Next available appointment, 3 weeks. Too long. Below that, she wrote the number for her father's cardiologist, just in case. She didn't know it then, but just in case would arrive sooner than anyone expected, and all her careful documentation would become a roadmap for saving more than just Marcus Reynolds' career. Sarah's keycard beeped green on the first try. The office door swung open to reveal Marcus Reynolds. the man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will, crumpled behind his mahogany desk like discarded paperwork. His eyes were open but unfocused, his left hand clutching his chest. "Mr. Reynolds." She crossed the room in 3 strides, her muscle memory from countless CPR refresher courses kicking in. The 911 operator's voice crackled from her phone speaker. "Emergency services, what's your location?" "Plaza Hotel, 47th floor executive suite," Sarah replied, already dropping to her knees beside Marcus. "Male, mid-50s. Possible heart attack. I'm starting CPR." Her hands moved to his tie, loosening it with practiced efficiency. "Security has been notified to escort EMTs." Marcus's eyes found hers, panic replacing his usual steel-cold confidence. "Can't breathe." His fingers scrabbled at his shirt buttons. "I know," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She helped him lie flat, her channel dress gathering dust from the carpet. "I'm going to help you, but you need to trust me. Can you do that?" A weak nod. She positioned her hands on his chest, the expensive fabric of his shirt crinkling under her palms. "I'm going to count, Mr. Reynolds. Try to focus on my voice." She began compressions, singing under her breath to keep time. "Ah ha ha ha, staying alive, staying alive." The same Bee Gees song her CPR instructor had used, now becoming literal. Her father had survived his heart attack because someone knew CPR. She refused to let this be different. "Did you know," she continued, keeping her voice conversational between counts, "that the Anderson merger you just approved has a hidden asset in their Singapore portfolio? Compress, compress, compress. I found it during translation. It's going to increase the deal's value by 12%. Marcus's eyes flickered, a ghost of his businesslike interest showing through the pain. Good. She needed him focused, fighting. The AED sheet had installed chimed as she pulled it from the wall. "This is going to help," she explained, cutting his shirt open with the attached scissors. Like quarterly reports, just with more immediate results. Her hands didn't shake as she applied the pads. Years of handling his business crisis had prepared her for this moment, though she'd never imagined it quite like this. The machine analyzed, then spoke. "Shock advised." "Clear," Sarah announced to the empty office, pressing the button. Marcus's body jerked. His eyes flew open, truly focusing on her for the first time in 3 years. "Sarah," he whispered, her actual name falling from his lips like a revelation. Then his eyes rolled back as the paramedics burst through the door. She stepped aside efficiently, briefing the EMTs with the same precision she used for board presentations. "First symptoms observed approximately 20 minutes ago. Loss of consciousness 3 minutes ago. 1 shock delivered. Continued chest pain before loss of consciousness." As they loaded him onto the stretcher, she heard one EMT say, "If his assistant hadn't." She didn't hear the rest, already pulling out her phone to enact the crisis management plan she prepared weeks ago. The board needed to be notified, but carefully. The press needed to be managed. The Tokyo markets would need reassurance. She caught Marcus's hand for a brief moment before they wheeled him out. "The company will be fine," she promised. "Focus on staying alive." She thought she felt a slight squeeze in response, but then he was gone, leaving her alone in his office with a ruined dress, an empty AED case, and the weight of a multi-billion-dollar company suddenly resting on her shoulders. 1 year after the gala that changed everything, Sarah Chen stood at the podium of the Global Leadership Summit, her position as Chief Strategy Officer no longer raising eyebrows. The headline in Forbes last week said it all. Reynolds Technologies reinvents corporate culture. Stock prices and employee satisfaction hit record highs. She spotted Marcus in the front row, looking healthier than he had in years. These days he wore his power differently. Less like armor, more like a well-tailored suit. He traded his 60-hour weeks for strategic delegation, his silent lunches for mentorship sessions. The man who once forgot her name now knew the birthdays of every employee on the executive floor. Innovation, Sarah began her keynote speech, isn't just about technology. Sometimes, it's about seeing the human element in every equation. Her gaze swept the audience of global business leaders. A year ago, Reynolds Technologies was a company that valued individual achievement above all else. Today, we've discovered that our greatest asset was always our collective potential. The presentation behind her showed the numbers that had made the transformation famous. Employee retention up 60%, productivity increased by 40%, and a stock price that had doubled in 12 months. But it was the less quantifiable changes that made Sarah proudest. The sound of laughter in meeting rooms, the cross-departmental projects that spawned revolutionary ideas, the junior employees confidently presenting to board members. We had a choice, she continued, pulling up a slide that showed their new organizational structure. We could continue treating our workforce like replaceable parts in a machine, or we could recognize that every person, from the CEO to the newest intern, brings unique value to our mission. Marcus nodded slightly from his seat. They both knew she was talking about more than organizational theory. Their weekly strategy sessions had become a masterclass in complementary leadership, his decades of business acumen blending with her innovative vision. He'd taught her the art of navigating board politics. She'd shown him the power of authentic connection. After the speech, they walked through the company's redesigned headquarters. The space embodied their new philosophy: transparent glass walls instead of barriers, collaborative spaces replacing corner offices, and yes, Sarah smiled at the memory: perfectly maintained AED units within reach of every department. You know, Marcus said, pausing by her old assistant's desk, now a thriving community workspace. I never did read page 47 of that contingency plan. Actually, there was no page 47, Sarah admitted. I just needed you to believe there was a plan until you were ready to see a better way forward. He laughed, a sound that no longer startled employees nearby. The best strategic minds never reveal all their cards at once, do they? I learned from the best, she replied, falling into step beside him as they headed to their next meeting. No longer walking 2 paces behind, no longer invisible. The Wall Street Journal had called it a corporate revolution. Harvard Business Review had termed it a case study in modern leadership. But for Sarah Chen and Marcus Reynolds, it was simpler than that. It was proof that sometimes the most powerful changes happen when we finally see what and who has been right in front of us all along. Sarah knew something was wrong the moment Marcus stepped onto the stage. His usual commanding stride had shortened, his shoulders slightly hunched, invisible tells to anyone who hadn't spent 3 years studying his every move. He reached the podium and gripped its edges, but she noticed his right thumb tapping against the wood. Marcus Reynolds never fidgeted. The teleprompter started rolling. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight marks a new era for Reynolds Technologies. His voice carried its usual authority, but Sarah caught the microscopic pause between sentences, the extra breath he shouldn't have needed. Her hand slipped into her clutch, fingers brushing against the emergency key card. Through her earpiece, the Tokyo office reported their stock climbing another 2 points. 600 investors watched Marcus, their phones poised to make multi-million-dollar decisions based on his next words. None of them noticed when he skipped line 3 of his speech, or when his joke about Silicon Valley landed half a beat too late. The future of sustainable technology. Marcus loosened his tie slightly. Sarah's heart rate accelerated. In 3 years, she'd never seen him adjust his clothing during a presentation. Her other hand was already typing a message to security to clear a path to his private office, her fingers moving without looking at the screen. The spreadsheets on the giant screen behind him showed projected earnings in the billions. Sarah saw him squint at them, something he'd never done before. His next sentence came out slightly slurred, covered smoothly by a sip of water. The investors were too busy watching their stock tickers to notice. And now, it gives me great pleasure to. Marcus's right foot dragged almost imperceptibly as he stepped back from the podium. Sarah was already moving, her path through the crowd mapped out during the venue walkthrough she'd insisted on yesterday. He turned to gesture at the presentation screen and missed, his hand waving at empty air 6 inches to the left. The board members in the front row were staring at their phones, missing the slight gray tinge creeping up their CEO's neck. But Sarah saw. She'd been watching for it since finding that first crumpled prescription. If you'll direct your attention to, Marcus's voice trailed off. His left hand twitched toward his chest, then deliberately returned to the podium. Even now, he was fighting to maintain control. Sarah reached the edge of the stage just as he said, "I apologize, but I need a brief moment." The crowd murmured politely, assuming this was planned. They didn't see him stumble slightly on the stairs, didn't notice how his exit was too rushed for someone known for his measured movements. But Sarah was already calling security on her phone while following him at a careful distance, her heels silent on the plush carpet. When Marcus Reynolds turned down the wrong corridor to his office, she knew they had minutes, maybe seconds. The emergency number was dialed before his office door finished closing behind him. She'd memorized his private entry code weeks ago, a safeguard she'd prayed she wouldn't need, but had known, somehow, that she would. 3 weeks into Marcus's recovery, Reynolds Technologies experienced what the Wall Street Journal called a quiet revolution. The change began with small things: meditation rooms appearing on each floor, healthy snacks replacing vending machines, and standing desks becoming standard issue. But Sarah's real transformation ran deeper than furniture. She sat in Marcus's office, her temporary command center, reviewing the latest implementation reports. The mission, possible wellness program, had seen 89% employee participation. The new collaborative project management system had reduced overtime by 40%. Even the notoriously cutthroat sales department had embraced her Rising Tide initiative, where team successes were rewarded over individual achievements. Ms. Chen, her new assistant, Michael, appeared at the door. She'd insisted he keep his desk visible from her office, not tucked away like she had been. "The Tokyo team is ready for their check-in, and HR wants to know if you'll speak at tomorrow's town hall about the mentorship program." Sarah smiled, remembering how she'd pitched that same mentorship program to Marcus 2 years ago. He dismissed it as unnecessary coddling. Now, it had a waiting list of senior executives volunteering to participate. Her phone buzzed with Marcus's daily text, "Page 47 strikes again." It had become their private joke, her tendency to bury revolutionary ideas in mundane reports. She texted back, "Page 63 this time. The wellness metrics are exceeding projections." The quarterly numbers backed her up. Productivity was up, sick days were down, and the company's stock had risen 12% despite their CEO's absence. Sarah had expected resistance from the old guard, but success had a way of silencing critics. She pulled out the presentation she'd been preparing for Marcus's return next week. Each slide represented a change she'd implemented, supported by hard data. The old Sarah would have buried her achievements in footnotes. The new Sarah had learned that visibility, when earned, wasn't something to shy away from. "Ms. Chen." "Michael again. Mr. Reynolds is here." Sarah looked up, startled. Marcus stood in the doorway of his own office, looking thinner, but steadier than she'd seen him at the hospital yesterday. His eyes took in the changes: the relocated desk, the collaborative workspace visible through the glass walls, the energy in the air. "Don't stop on my account," he said, lowering himself into the visitor's chair, the ergonomic one she'd ordered for him weeks ago. "I'm just here to observe." "You should be resting," she said, already reaching for her tablet to reschedule his return meetings. "Watching my company become better than I ever imagined it could be." He smiled, a real smile, not his boardroom version. "This is exactly what the doctor ordered." Sarah straightened. "Then let me show you what page 47 really looks like in action." Sarah Chen's morning routine at Reynolds Technologies began 3 hours before her boss's arrival. At 5:30 a.m., her heels clicked against the polished marble floors of the empty 47th floor, the sound echoing through corridors that would soon buzz with corporate energy. She liked these quiet moments. They were the only times she felt she could occupy space without apologizing for it. The morning light painted Manhattan's skyline in shades of amber as she methodically prepared Marcus Reynolds' office. Temperature set to exactly 72 degrees. Fresh coffee from the Brazilian beans he imported but never acknowledged her for finding. Calendar updated with the Hong Kong market's overnight shifts. She'd learned early that perfection wasn't enough. Invisibility required anticipation. When her phone buzzed at 8:27 am, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Right on schedule. Marcus Reynolds's Bentley had just entered the parking garage. She quickly switched his desktop background to display the latest market projections. He'd pretend to have been tracking them all morning during the 9 a.m. board meeting. The elevator dimmed at 8:43 am. Sarah straightened imperceptibly as Marcus strode past her desk, his Italian leather shoes soundless against the carpet she'd had replaced last month after noticing his slight wince at the old flooring's firmness. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice professional and measured. He grunted something that might have been a greeting, already absorbed in his phone. "The Anderson merger documents are on your desk," she continued, falling into step beside him. "I took the liberty of highlighting the concerning patterns in their Q3 earnings. There's also, just send me the summary." He cut her off, waving his hand dismissively as he entered his office. She bit back the information about how she'd spent the night translating their subsidiary reports from Mandarin, catching a mistranslation that could have cost them millions. Sarah returned to her desk, adding another tally to her mental scorecard. 847 days of being called Sharon, when he bothered to address her at all. She pulled up her resume on her secure personal drive, the one she updated weekly, but never sent out. Harvard Business School, top of her class, fluent in 4 languages, 3 years of orchestrating deals that had doubled Reynolds Technologies' market share. The phone rang. "Reynolds Technologies, Mr. Reynolds' office," she answered smoothly. "Sarah, it's David from the board. That analysis you sent about the Anderson numbers, brilliant catch. We'd love to have you presented in today's meeting." She watched through the glass walls as Marcus practiced his presentation gestures, unaware that his talking points came from her overnight research. "I appreciate the offer, David, but I think it would be more effective coming from Mr. Reynolds. I'll make sure he's fully briefed." After hanging up, she opened her drawer and straightened her collection of perfectly sharpened pencils. In the reflection of her computer screen, she watched her boss take credit for her work during his morning video call. One day, she told herself, updating the resume one more time before deleting it again. One day, being invisible won't be enough. She just didn't know that day would come sooner than she thought, or that it would start with a crumpled prescription she was never meant to find.